Definitely the thing I love the most about Nicaragua is the people. Just the people are amazing. I think that the culture, just how the Nicaraguans, they're called Nicaraguenses. It's like super pretty, right? Nicaraguenses. They're just so kind and just loving, and they just love you. I feel like the moment you talk to them, it's like you've been their friend for your whole life, you know. You always, when you greet people, you greet the women, well, if you're a sister, you greet the women with a kiss on the cheek. They're so hospitable. They would always invite us in and always say, like, take a seat. Even if they didn't have a seat, maybe they had a rock, they would say, take a rock, you know. Always willing to give whatever they have. I learned so much from the Nicaraguans, just to give what you have, even when you have nothing. I remember going to a home and honestly, they had dirt floors, and they probably had only like a couple things in their refrigerator, and she gives us her homemade fresco, or like the juice that she made, you know. So I think they are always willing to give away what they can, just because they want to show their love. They're so kind, and that's something that I really, you know, even now try to think back to them and how they would act. Every single time you would enter a room, you would go around to almost every person and shake their hand and greet them. And that is something that I love in the Nicaraguan culture, because you're acknowledging every single person that's there. You're saying hi to every person, where I feel like in the U.S. you're just like, hey, you know. I think that just showed that like every person is important. The best and most popular food in Nicaragua is gallo pinto. That is rice and beans mixed together, but somehow they put their magic in it and it tastes glorious. I don't know how they do it. I've tried to make it now and it just doesn't work. But they have gallo pinto for almost every dinner, sometimes for breakfast. So usually like at lunch, they'll have rice and then beans, like your red beans. And then for dinner, they're like mixed together for gallo pinto. And you usually always have plátanos, so like plantains, in some sort of form. It could be like maduros, and they're like yellow, and they just fry them, and they're yummy. Or they make them like tajadas or tostones, like different ways of making it. They like make it into like chips, or they like squash them and fry them. They can make plátanos in like 10 different ways, I swear. Another yummy thing I liked in Nicaragua was, I think it's called figuron, and they would have yuca with chicharrón, which is like the pig skin, but it's super good. And then they just put like ensalada on top. That was one of my favorite meals, honestly. And they have nacatamales, which is like tamales, but it's not. On the inside it has rice and tomatoes and onions and just filled with a lot of stuff, and then they cover it in like those big leaves, and then they just put it over the hot fire for like 4 hours. It's so good. Amazing. Sometimes we would eat stuff off of the street and it was delicious. My favorite was these called quesillos. So they'd get tortillas, and then they would put this cheese in it, and then like onions and the sauce. Oh, I don't know how they made it, but it was good. And the tortillas are just, they're not like U.S. tortillas we have here. No, not at all. They make them over the fire. They just have their masa, and I learned how to make it. You just like, you know, you just slap it on the table, and they put it on there, and it's delicious. And you eat it with this little cheese that's called cuajada. Perfect. They have a lot of different cheese. The cheese is great, and they fry everything. So, you know, maybe you won't be the healthiest, but it's delicious. So they have this other cheese that they would just fry, and so they would just eat queso frito, fried cheese. Like, you just eat fried cheese. It was great. So sometimes for breakfast, I would eat fried plátanos and fried cheese for breakfast. Probably not the best, healthiest, but it was good. Something you should know about the transportation in Nicaragua. Obviously, you're not going to have a car, so you're normally walking around. But if you are going to... There's like 4 main modes of transportation. One are these little moto taxis. The first time I went in them, I felt like it was a ride at Disneyland. It was so fun. They're just like these little taxis that you can fit. Well, you could technically fit up to 7 people in them, but it's supposed to fit like 2 or 3. Go in them. They have like 3 wheels, and they can just take you somewhere. You just pay the driver, or they have taxis in some areas. And then they have these buses that are like big vans almost. And then they have like the really big buses if you're going to like a faraway city or something like that. So transportation is great. You'll realize that Nicaraguans are like, they do miracles in squishing onto small spaces. So if you think that the ride at BYU is squished, you go to Nicaragua and you'll think otherwise, because people will be squished up to the walls in the buses. But, I think they're nice to get everywhere and where they need to be. In Nicaragua, they have their Independence Day or something like that. I think it's in September. And I was actually in Diriamba, in my first area. Almost every day during like that week, they would have parades and bands, and like all of this. All the schools would get together and, be playing all their instruments, and I thought that was really cool. Yeah, they have like this dance in Nicaragua called El Guiguense. That's like a cool thing about their culture. Another thing about like the holidays in Nicaragua, I just spent one Christmas there. I spent my Christmas in La Borgoña. I think that was probably the poorest area that I served in, and some people did have Christmas trees, but some people didn't. And something that was really awesome, a few people from the U.S. came who had gathered gifts, and a ton of gifts to give away to the children. And so they had this Christmas party, and they gave away all these gifts that people from the U.S. had donated. So I thought that was just so like amazing and like heart-wrenching to see, just to be on the other side of that, because normally we're the ones donating or giving away a care package. So just to see the kids receiving those gifts, that was just a really cool experience. Okay, so I have this, probably one of my favorite stories from Nicaragua. So there was this week where we had a lot of earthquakes. And so me and my companion were teaching a lesson in this lady's house, and this earthquake starts happening. And I have never experienced an earthquake like that before, and neither had she. And so the lady gets up from the lesson and is like, oh, I need to go get my son from school. So she runs up, and we're like left in her house. And so we go outside, and the earthquake stops. And, everybody's in the streets just like, what just happened? And they do get earthquakes in Nicaragua, so, they're probably more used to it than we were. There was one night that even our neighbors came over to us and asked us, like, do you want to come and stay at our house? Like, I know you guys are alone in your apartment, and people always from the neighborhood coming to check on us and make sure we were okay. And so it just shows how nice the people are there, and we're just like, it's okay. Bueno, quiero compartir mi testimonio con los nicaragüenses. Yo sé que Dios ama a cada uno de nosotros, y que Jesucristo dio su vida por nosotros, que Él sabe nuestros dolores y nuestros sufrimientos y todo lo que estamos pasando en la vida. Yo sé que al vivir el Evangelio y vivir los mandamientos de Dios, que vamos a estar más felices y vamos a tener una vida con paz y gozo. Y bueno, amo cada uno de los nicaragüenses.